Today on CodeDependent, we're going to take a look at how to animate changes in state of a container. So someone had asked on my blog how to animate adding and removing items from a VBox. This is a Flex 3 container, so we'll be taking a look at how to do this sort of stuff in Flex 3. So my first take on it was sort of the trivial, okay, well, we'll just animate the position, the size of the object as it comes in, and we'll fade the thing in. There's different things you could do for the animation, but I thought, basically animating space for the object and then fading the object in was a reasonable take at this thing. So I tried that. So we can take a look at the results here. So we have our application. When we want to add a row, we're going to add a button in between these two, and you can see how that works here. So we create some space for it over time, and then we fade the thing in. And it's fairly simple container, simple situation, but I'm trying to demonstrate the animation, not actually an interesting application here. Similarly, we can click on any of the buttons, and we'll fade the object out, and then we'll animate the size there. So we get rid of the objects in sort of the reverse way as we're adding them to the container. Right? So let's take a look at how this works in code. So if we click on the add row, we call our script code above add row, and that'll add it to this container here. We have a VBox defined. By default, we have 2 buttons in there, but we're going to be adding buttons to it over time. So our add row will be called, our add row function will be called here. We'll create a new button. We'll give it a label, and then we do some simple stuff here with styles and colors to randomize the color. And this is simply so that you can actually see individual buttons over in the container over time. And you can tell which one's actually being added and removed. Otherwise, it gets a little bit hard to tell what's going on. I really don't want people using random colors on their button labels. So then we add an event listener so that we know to remove the button when it's clicked. Then we set the initial alpha value of the button to 0. So we want it to be transparent by default so that as we add it to the container, we're not actually immediately seeing the object. Instead, we want to fade it in over time. So we'll set the initial value to be transparent. We'll add the child to the container. So we'll go ahead and add the button to the VBox. And then we'll set a value on our resize animation that's defined elsewhere. And we'll set the alpha 2 to go ahead and fade the object in, and we'll set the target of the animation here, and then we'll go ahead and play the effect. And we can take a look at the animation here. So we have a couple of animations going on here. We have a resize in and a fade in, and then we have a resize fader. So we've got our resizer fader with the fade in and the resize in effects declared inside of it. So resize fader is a sequence that's going to run for a second. Each of its child effects is going to run for a second each. It's getting a little bit long for animations in general. I would do this quicker in a real application, but it's easier to see what's going on in the video if it's a little bit slower. We're going to do an animate property and the ID is resize in. We're going to animate the height property on our target object from a value of 0. So what's going on is that we're going to start out with a button of height 0, and then we're going to expand it over time. Right? So this is the way that we get the resize effect in the container. We're creating space for the object by basically saying our object is of height 0, and then we grow that height over time, and automatically the layout system in the container is going to be creating space for the object. And then our fade in effect is defined to have an alpha value of an alpha 2 value of 1, so it's automatically going to fade in. So we run that effect, it fades it in, and then when someone clicks on the button, we're going to call our remove row function here. So we had added a listener for this. We call the remove row function when someone clicks on the button so that we can delete it. We're going to add an event listener for the effect end event, and this is so that we can actually physically remove the button from the container after we're done running our animation. We're going to set the target of the object to the button that was clicked, and we're going to play the fader resizer effect. So in this case, we're actually going to fade the thing out to 0, and we're going to then resize it. So we're going to fade the button out, then we're going to shrink the object. So we're going to change the height of the object to 0 over time. And that runs our automatic deletion operation. So we add a row. We're basically resizing the button from 0 to its proper height. And then when we delete a row, we're going to resize it to 0. We're going to fade it out first, and then we're going to resize it to 0. So this works OK, but if you look closely, and I hope this comes through in the video, You have a jumping artifact when we add a row, right? So it immediately snaps a few pixels, and then it animates the rest smoothly. So I think it's okay in general, but it's not really a very smooth effect, right? And similarly, when we delete, we get a nice smooth fade, and we get a nice smooth resize, and then it snaps a few pixels, right? Just at the end of it. And what's going on is that there's an automatic vertical gap in a VBox that is assigned to space objects away from each other, right? So these buttons aren't all collapsed on top of each other. So when we automatically add the button in just prior to running the effect, we're going to get an extra gap because we've added an object in there. Even though the object has height 0, it still gets gaps around it so that it can be positioned appropriately relative to the other objects around it. And so even though we've got a nice smooth animation to resize and fade the object, we're not animating the gap value over time. So it turns out that there's a better way to get a smooth animation, and I'm going to build in a little bit of suspense here by ending this approach now. And in the next episode, we'll talk about how to use the techniques of transitions to actually get a better animation for this effect. If you want to see the code for this application and other applications, like the better approach, go ahead and check out my blog at graphics-geek.blogspot.com.